A world on the edge.
There was a strange tension in the air in the late 1930s. As Europe plunged into war, the United States watched from a distance, almost like spectators observing a drama they refused to join. The First World War still echoed painfully in American memory, and most citizens were determined. They would never send young men to die overseas again. But the world was changing too fast for America to sit still. And without realizing it, the country was being pulled into a vortex that would define the entire century. An America that did not want war. In 1940, the vast majority of Americans opposed entering the conflict. Movements like America First packed stadiums with people demanding strict isolationism. For many, the European war was a European problem. Meanwhile, President Roosevelt tried to balance his own understanding of global danger with the will of the people. Domestic politics became a tightrope, stretched thin and ready to snap. The shadow of the Axis. While the United States debated, the storm intensified. Hitler's Germany swept across country after country, like an unstoppable machine. In Asia, Japan built a brutal empire, conquering huge territories at alarming speed. Italy joined the alliance, forming a power bloc determined to reshape the world. America watched, concerned, but still unwilling to act. Roosevelt's first secret steps. Roosevelt, however, saw the long-term danger clearly. He knew that if the Axis powers won, the United States would eventually stand alone against them. Quietly, he began preparing the nation. He expanded the military, invested in secret projects, and strengthened industry. None of this was openly admitted to the public, but Washington moved as if it knew something terrible was coming. A world divided. With the signing of the Tripartite Pact, Germany, Italy, and Japan formalized their global military alliance. It was a direct warning. Any country that interfered would face all three powers. Although they didn't mention the United States by name, everyone knew who the message was meant for. The world was now split in two, and America was caught in between. Arming without fighting. Roosevelt then introduced the Lend-Lease Act, a brilliant political maneuver. The United States would supply weapons and materials to Britain and other allies without officially entering the war. To the American public, it was simply lending tools. But to Hitler, it was an unmistakable act of aggression. Neutrality was fading, even if no one was willing to say it out loud. The hidden war in the Atlantic. Soon, German submarines began attacking American ships, escorting convoys across the Atlantic. The U.S. Navy fired back. Undeclared skirmishes took place beneath the waves. Ships sank and American lives were lost, while the general public remained unaware. War was already at the doorstep, just waiting to be acknowledged. Japan prepares for the inevitable. Across the Pacific, Japan watched the United States with growing tension. The American oil embargo threatened the empire's survival. To Japanese military leaders, this was not diplomacy. It was economic warfare. They were faced with a brutal choice: retreat and collapse, or strike first. The decision they made would change the world. The road to Pearl Harbor. In secret meetings in Tokyo, a bold plan took shape. They would attack the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, hoping to cripple America before it could react. It was a risky gamble, but to Japan's leaders, it was the only option left. While pilots trained and fleets mobilized, Americans went about their daily lives, unaware of the storm heading their way. The attack that changed everything. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the skies over Hawaii filled with the sound of engines and destruction. Pearl Harbor, calm and unprepared, became hell within minutes. Explosions shook the harbor. Battleships burned, and chaos spread everywhere. The attack was devastating, and it shattered any remaining hope of neutrality. A nation awakens. The next day, Roosevelt addressed the nation in one of the most iconic speeches ever delivered. He called the attack a date which will live in infamy, and asked Congress to declare war. The vote was nearly unanimous. After years of resisting involvement, America entered the war with fury and resolve. Hitler's greatest mistake. But the shock didn't end there. Just days later, Hitler declared war on the United States, a move even his own generals were shocked by. Suddenly, America was fighting in two theaters, Europe and the Pacific. It was the beginning of a full-scale global conflict unlike anything the world had seen. The industrial metamorphosis. America responded with staggering speed. Factories that once produced cars now produced tanks and bombers. Within 1 year, U.S. military production surpassed that of the Axis powers combined. It was as if the nation had transformed overnight into a massive engine of war. The true arsenal of democracy. Millions answer the call. Young men from every corner of the country enlisted. Farmers, factory workers, students, all left home to fight. Women took over the workforce, running factories, offices, and even joining the military. The entire society mobilized. The war was no longer a political debate. It was a collective mission. America's first major operation. In November 1942, American troops stepped onto the battlefield for the first time in North Africa. Operation Torch would test the U.S. Army against the Axis forces led by Rommel, one of Germany's greatest commanders. The learning curve was steep, but essential. It was the beginning of America's real wartime experience. The Pacific turns into a firestorm. Meanwhile, the war in the Pacific raged brutally. The Battle of Midway in 1942 became the turning point. Thanks to American codebreakers, the U.S. ambushed the Japanese fleet, destroying 4 of their carriers. For the first time, Japan was forced into retreat. The tide of the Pacific had shifted. Production that decided the future. By 1943, American industrial capacity seemed almost limitless. Planes rolled off assembly lines by the hour, ships by the week, and vehicles by the thousand. Many historians believe that this overwhelming production, more than any single battle, is what truly decided the outcome of the war. Life on the home front. While soldiers fought overseas, civilians fought their own battle at home. Rationing, war bonds, metal collection drives, and constant propaganda shaped everyday life. Hollywood joined the effort, producing films to boost morale. The war reached every household. The invasion of Italy. After victory in North Africa, the Allies moved into Italy. The campaign was long, slow, and fiercely contested. The rugged mountains and harsh conditions tested American troops as never before. But step by step, they advanced. Rome eventually fell, and the Axis grip on Europe weakened. The plan of the century. Meanwhile, in absolute secrecy, preparations for the largest military operation in history began. The invasion of Normandy, D-Day, required unprecedented coordination, logistics, deception techniques, massive troop training. Everything had to be perfect. The dawn of D-Day. On June 6, 1944, thousands of American soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. The defenses were deadly, the resistance fierce, and the cost high. But they advanced inch by inch, forging a path that would lead to the liberation of Europe. Europe is liberated. Once the beachheads were secured, Allied forces moved rapidly. Town after town fell. Paris was liberated. Hope returned to Europe. The United States now played a decisive role in freeing the continent from tyranny. Hitler's last gamble. Hitler launched one final desperate offensive in the Battle of the Bulge. The winter of 1944 was brutal, and American troops endured unimaginable conditions, but they held the line. The German advance stalled, and the end became inevitable. The end in Europe. In 1945, Allied forces crossed the Rhine and pushed into Germany. Cities collapsed under relentless pressure. Then the world discovered the horrors of the concentration camps, a nightmare no one could ever forget. Soon after, Germany surrendered. The Pacific still burns. Even with Europe freed, Japan refused to give up. Island-to-island battles, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, became some of the bloodiest of the entire war. Japanese resistance was fierce, often suicidal. An invasion of Japan promised catastrophic casualties. The power that changed history. The Manhattan Project had reached its terrifying conclusion. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki shattered Japan's ability to continue the war. Overwhelmed and devastated, the empire surrendered. The Second World War was over, and the world was forever changed. The rise of a superpower. After the war, the United States emerged as the world's dominant power. The economy was booming, innovation soared, and the nation stepped confidently into its new role as leader of the Western world. The era of American global influence had begun. The cost of victory. But victory came at a heavy price. More than 400,000 Americans lost their lives. Millions returned home changed forever, carrying trauma and memories too painful to express. The war left scars on every family, every community. Glory and grief walked side by side. The war that transformed America. America's involvement in World War II reshaped everything: technology, society, industry, global strategy, and politics. The war pulled the nation out of isolation and permanently onto the world stage, and with the rise of the Soviet Union, a new era, the Cold War, began.
The final answer. So how did America enter the war?
It wasn't just Pearl Harbor. It was a combination of fear, politics, aggression, global shifts, and historic inevitability. The attack on Pearl Harbor was the spark, but the fire had been building for years. The story of America's entry into World War II is the story of a nation awakening to its destiny and stepping into a role that would shape the modern world.